good morning. Thanks for joining us today on this cold, blustery, windy day. Fortunately, you will be out before the snow that's supposedly coming our way. It's not supposed to start until later this afternoon, evening, so you'll be safe and at home and cuddled up and warm. So my name is Paula Castner. I am one of the co-founders of Seven Bridge Writers Collaborative. Can I ask, are there folks for whom this is your first Seven Bridge workshop? Oh, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming. Can I ask how you heard about the workshop?
I saw a listing for a different group with the Seven Bridges.
Oh, okay.
The Worcester Public Library.
Oh, nice.
So I kind of followed.
Okay, great. We just like to, I do a lot of publicity and it's helpful to know where my publicity is working. Might I ask you how you?
It was in the Stowe-Bolton.
In the Stowe-Bolton. Good. I love it when the publicity works for us. So means I'm not wasting my time. So for folks who are new, Seven Bridge Writers Collaborative, I used to say we're fairly new. Now this is our, we've been around for 6.5 years, so I don't think we're all that new anymore. Maybe I could say we're moderately new, but we had formed Seven Bridge when we noticed that there was a hole in Central Mass for connecting writers and for providing writing events that are particular to writers' needs, where we go to you. We don't expect you to drive to us in Boston or to Western Mass. We now work with several different libraries across Central Massachusetts between Groton and Worcester. Where we see holes and people have a need for writing, we go to you and try and make writing events accessible. The other thing is we try and keep in mind people's financial needs. And so, as you know, this workshop is free. All of our Saturday morning workshops are free. We offer free writing groups that meet 3 sessions a year. We offer free critique groups. We offer free open mics. We do have some classes that we offer which folks do need to pay a fee, but we try and keep those as low cost as possible. So just keep that in mind, because we are a nonprofit. So if you do feel like you'd like to give Seven Bridge a gift, we would appreciate it, because even though we offer everything for free to you, it's not free to us. We do pay the folks who facilitate and prepare and lead these workshops. So we do have a donation basket in the back, and we are a nonprofit, so everything is tax deductible. Just a couple of events that are coming up. So today it's a humor workshop. In February, our workshop is on the scene. How do you write an effective scene? Which is, everyone who's a writer knows that's sort of your building block for your stories and your novels. We also have an open mic coming up, the first one of 2020. It's still hard for me to believe we're in 2020. But on February 6th. And the open mics are fun. If you have anything that you've written, 5 minutes or less, or if you have a novel and you want to pull an excerpt out, Ray's been to a lot of our open mics, and it's a good opportunity for you to share some of your work, hear other people's works, connect with other writers. And we usually have a pretty good time, right, Ray? Yeah. So, you know, like he's going to say anything else when I'm putting him on the spot, but, you know. But, you know, and you come, you sign up, you read, and we just spend time together, so something that folks might consider. The other thing is, if any of you have works where you're at a point thinking about publishing, we are having a publishing and book marketing workshop that's happening at the Littleton Library in April. It's a 2-week event. It's 6 hours, 3 hours each week, for the low price of $75. A lot of information. You'll learn all about the most up-to-date trends in traditional, hybrid, and self-publishing. So we do have information in the back for that. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and Dave Agans will introduce himself. I'll give you a little bit of information about myself, and then what we have in front of you is we printed out a handout so that if you want to take notes as we go along. This is just generally how we're going to be speaking today. And then the second one, which we don't want you to look at, has examples on them that at the appropriate time we'll tell you to look at them, but we don't want you to look at them ahead of time because we don't want to spoil the jokes. So they're funny the first time, but not necessarily the second, depending on what they are. So we're going to go ahead and have a seat, and you want to tell folks a little bit about yourself, Dave?
Dave Agans. I am a writer. I've been writing comedy since I was in like 6th grade. I was writing spy spoofs. Get smart like spy spoofs, and I've been doing that now. I've written musical comedies, and I have a novel, which the first one is in the back there if you're interested in buying a copy, a signed copy later. And I'm working on the second book of that trilogy, which is a conspiracy comedy. There's a conspiracy behind everything that annoys you, basically, is the conceit of it. Kind of like Men in Black meets Tinfoil Hat. And I've also written a technical book. I've been a software engineer, hardware and software engineer for 40 years, and I wrote a technical book about debugging, but it was also funny because I don't write anything that's not funny. And it still sells quite a bit. It still sells 1,000 copies a year, even after what's now been 18 years it's been out. So I guess when they were looking for somebody to do a comedy seminar, you asked some people that are in a different writers group that I'm in, the New Hampshire Writers Project, do you know anybody who's funny? And they both immediately thought I was. So hopefully I can come through on that promise and show you I've really thought a lot about what makes things funny, and hope to present that to you here and get us going.
Good.
Ready?
Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're getting started, but still feel free to get some hot water and tea and snacks so that you can be comfortable as you begin. So why use humor? If you look at the list we have, these are all things people know. You know, humor attracts people. It lessens tension when you're in a very difficult situation. Humor, they say, enhances memory. And we all know this. Think of all the funny stories that you remember from growing up that have just stuck with you for ages and ages. My son and my 2 daughters will always talk about the time when I yelled at my husband because he dropped the mug, and my husband standing there holding the handle going, but I'm still holding the handle. I didn't drop the mug, you know. And my children remember that story. You know, they're grown, older now, and they'll always remember that story because it was just so funny at the time. Humor boosts creativity. They've actually done studies where they apply all the electrodes to people's brains to see, you know, what stimulates creativity, enhances mood, and humor actually makes you more creative. So something to think about the next time you're going to sit down to write. You know, listen to your favorite jokes, or you know, or favorite funny movies or something like that. And then we know this: humor produces enjoyment. We love to laugh. You know, laughter makes us feel good. You know, it does things to us physiologically and emotionally and mentally. So for all of those reasons that affect life, they also affect writing. You know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Harry Potter series. It's a series that in many ways has some deep, heavy stuff in it. You know, good versus evil, you know, being orphaned, you know, feeling unwanted. But there's a lot of humor in J.K. Rowling's books, in her books. They took them all out of the movie except for the first one. But if you read the books, they're delightfully humorous. And they help us to deal with the darker elements because we laugh along the way. So one of the things we want to do as we start is brainstorm with you all. What is funny? What makes people laugh? We're going to write your ideas as you think about it.
Surprises.
Surprises, okay. Yes,
Incongruous elements.
okay.
If you get them all, we're just going to cancel the seminar.
Yeah.
Play on words.
Play on words, okay. What else?
Outrageous but acceptable.
Okay. And sometimes the not acceptable too, you know, what it was the world's funniest home videos, like a lot of those to me seemed awful and people were hysterically laughing. So, you know, or something like the Three Stooges that, you know, people think are funny that I don't, but, you know, sometimes the unacceptable is funny too, so, yes.
Silly accidents.
Silly accidents.
The unexpected.
The unexpected, yes. Sometimes out of context, we just had, right when we were setting up, I was talking to my middle child on the phone on a video chat, and apparently my son had put a comic book filter on, but I hadn't realized that, so I'm talking to my daughter, you know, Dave and I are setting up, and she goes, you know, what was her exact...
Do you see yourself as a comic book character?
Do you see yourself as a comic book character? And so I stop and I'm like, not usually. Is this something I'm supposed to consider? And then she goes, no, Mom, you're literally a comic book character. And then she sent me a picture of it on my phone where I'm literally, you know, look like I'm a comic book character. And so, you know, we were laughing because it's just something that just happens, you know, out of context. And then you say, oh, that was funny.
Well, it also has a double meaning.
Yes,
Right.
double meanings.
Right.
That's actually,
Yes, misinterpretation of a double meaning. Is
anything else? Yes.
Exaggeration.
Exaggeration. Yeah, I'm starting to.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe this doesn't make sense, but I thought making light of something.
I'm minimizing, I was just saying.
Okay.
Minimizing,
Yeah.
the opposite of
Yeah.
exaggeration.
You know, challenging my spelling. I'm a writer,
I was just
but
going to
you
say,
know.
I'm glad I didn't have to write exaggeration. I'm pretty sure I would have blown it.
But that's just a few things
Yep.
to get our minds going here as we think about humor. So just a quick overview of the workshop. Dave's going to talk a little bit about how to be funny. And then he and I are going to tag team about what is funny, some of the techniques that we use to make people laugh. And then our hope is that we have enough time to have practice where you guys will write a little exercise, you know, attempt at humor. We'll talk about some general advice and then hopefully have time to rewrite what you did so that you'll go home with some tools that you can use going forward. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Okay, so there's kind of a couple categories here. You know, we're talking about actual techniques of, you know, humor that you put in the writing, but there's some sort of things that prepare you for that, and I wanted to go through those. So there's just an overview of that. There's reading funny stuff. There's some wisdom from humorists. Knowing your world, and a thing that I've called Crary's Law, which is actually named for a guy named Dave Crary, who's the funniest human being I know. So the first thing is reading funny stuff. There's a bunch of funny stuff out there that you can read. Dave Barry columns. Dave Barry is a master humorist. He's got columns online. If you haven't seen a Dave Barry column, just get one and you'll see his techniques. If you read 3 or 4 of them, you'll see he uses a bunch of classic techniques, but he's a really funny guy, and it will help you. And he writes nothing but humor. He's into, it's not like he's adding a little humor here and there for some other reason. His columns are totally devoted to making you laugh from start to finish. So look up Dave Barry. And the other thing is funny nonfiction, right? You can go in, humor is a genre. You can sign up for an email list for, you know, BookBub and get notices when there's new humor out. You can go to the humor section at the library or the bookstore. So you can buy nonfiction humor, and those are typically going to be, you know, people describing their daily life, their blogs, you know, traveling, traveling around Ireland with a fridge kind of things, where you get very humorous but nonfiction kind of jokes. Then there's funny fiction, which is where I'm at. I'm really, really into funny fiction. Unfortunately, there's no genre for that. You can't really look it up. You can on Amazon, like, search for funny fiction. That's a good thing. In the bookstore, I asked, how do I find funny fiction? And they said, well, there isn't a section, but if you go into the fiction, general fiction, and look for books with bright colored covers, those are the funny ones. or those are the ones that are likely to be funny. So there's a kind of an interesting little bookseller trick. I also, because I couldn't find funny fiction very easily, I have an online thing called the Yucks Files, which is, and I do this conspiracy thing throughout all of it. It's that they're trying to hide funny fiction from you. So I'm going to expose and bring you the funny fiction. So there's a bunch of reviews of books that I've read, and a lot of it is new authors. Some of it is famous authors, Christopher Moore and people like Carl Hyacin and Christopher Buckley have very, very funny books out. And I review them, and kind of for some of them, since they're new writers, for good writing, good editing, good stories, good editing, and then of course good humor. And if it's not really funny, I don't put it in there. So that's a good list if you want to sort of get an idea of what other people are doing if you're writing funny fiction. It'll be in the there's a pointer to it, a link.
Everything we're discussing, you have in front of you. We just don't want you to be looking at it while we're talking about it.
Until we get to it, yeah. So anyway, yeah, you can look that up online. It's on my Urban Legion website. And if, by the way, if you have funny books that you like, send them to, let me know what they are, and I'll get them and I'll read them and I'll review them. So I'm always on the lookout for more funny fiction that I haven't seen before.
Do you think that like Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle and stuff?
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, I love Kurt Vonnegut, and his humor has definitely affected my humor in a lot of ways. I don't know if I've got any Kurt Vonnegut up on that site. I should do that. I've read all the books, so. I even have hardcovers of his, the latest ones that he came out with. So that's a great suggestion. So then there's the Funny Times. Every month I get a thing called the Funny Times, which is a newspaper, and it is full of cartoons and sometimes like a Dave Barry type column, various columns. It's really wonderful, and it makes my month. It's sort of like the highlight of my month when the Funny Times comes in. I read it while I'm eating breakfast and stuff. But I will warn you, if you're arch-conservative, you're going to hate it, because it's published by ex-hippies, the people who did Firesign Theater back in the 60s and 70s. And actually, even for liberals, because these days the political atmosphere is so charged, there's a lot of satire. And satire is often just not funny, it's just sad. So there's some content, maybe 20% that's just that's satire, and you grumble, and if you're a conservative, you'll hate it. If you're a liberal, you'll just be sad about it. So that's a warning. But otherwise, I love the thing. There's some, I do spit takes with my coffee in the morning sometimes because the cartoons are so funny. Some humorous wisdom. This is just stuff that kind of keeping in mind as you're writing, and one of them is please yourself. If you don't think it's funny, no one will. Forced humor doesn't work. There's the thing that talks about no tears in the author, no tears in the audience, in the reader or whatever. It's the same thing with laughter. If you don't think it's funny, no one else will. You gotta make it funny to you. And if you think it's funny and other people don't, no big deal. My favorite line is, they can't all be gems. I make jokes like crazy, and maybe 20% don't land, but that's okay. You just keep trying. And then the other thing is smiles, not laughs. If you're writing stand-up or a brief column, you can have a joke in every paragraph or a joke in every line, but generally it gets tiresome if you're just constantly making jokes. So a few good laughs built into something that's more sort of mildly humorous is going to be more effective in general. And then the other thing is, and you'll see why this later, looking for humor in your world. When you're in daily life, play with possibilities. When you see things happening, Paula mentioned the thing about, do you think of yourself or do you see yourself as a comic book character, right? That you got to latch on to that kind of stuff and realize that stuff is happening. Project things out. What if? See where that leads. What if that guy got off the bus and did this? Et cetera. Improv players have a thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of the improvisational types. They have a thing called yes and. When a improv player says, okay, he comes in, they have no idea what they're doing. He says, I'm going to the banquet tonight. The other player never says, no, the banquet's not tonight. We're going to something else tonight. He always says, yes, we're going to the banquet tonight. And the banquet is about herding pigs. You know, the other one says, yes, the herding pig banquet, right? And they always just continue to go outward from wherever they are without ever backing up. When we do brainstorming here, we don't say, no, that's not a good idea. We just write everything down and try to play off of it. So always try to go where everything leads as much as you can. The other thing about this is that it helps you see what your readers will understand. So if you know what's out there in the real world, you know what your readers are seeing in the real world. And now when you make jokes about that, their expectations, you can twist their expectations based on the real world. Your real world may be different from your reader's real world, and we'll talk about that a little later. But that's the reason to pay attention to what's going on around you, because that's going to be the source of your humor. So, knowing your world. Let's talk a little bit more about that. There are, in order to twist expectations, you have to know what the expectations are, right? So, for example, the first thing is tropes in culture. Trope is kind of a well-worn situation, if you will. You know, golf jokes are all about how golf is more important than anything else, more important than your marriage, than your whatever. Dogs and mailmen, wives and mailmen, cats pushing stuff off surfaces. These are tropes. These are things that everybody knows about, and you can make jokes about them. I saw a great Scott Hilburn Argyle sweater cartoon. I have a daily calendar, and it shows these two witches, and one of them's moping, and she says, "The doctor says I can't have children." And the other witch is patting her on the head and says, "That's okay, dear. Dietary restrictions aren't the end of the world." So, right? If you don't know about witches eating children, you're not gonna get that, right? Here's a more subtle one. See how many people get this one. Christopher Moore, in his latest book, Sacre Bleu, or relatively recent book, Sacre Bleu, he's describing the siege of Paris. This is Van Gogh's time, whatever time that is. I don't actually know. And he says, there were so many encampments around Paris, you couldn't catapult a cow without hitting one. Okay, how many people got that? Okay, so that's a Monty Python reference. In Monty Python, the French knight starts catapulting cows. Fetchez la vache, he says, and they start catapulting cows out onto the thing. So here's a guy. He's a very well-known writer. I mean, he's best-selling author, and he sticks a Monty Python joke into the middle of his book, just tosses it off. You know? So there's a case of not everybody's going to get it. Yeah. You know, but it was worth it.
And sometimes, you have to know who your audience is going to be. So I don't know how many folks have seen the Crazy Rich Asians movie, which is based on a book. Now, I'm Asian, so I read the books with my other Asian friends, and we go to the movies, and we're hysterically laughing. Tears are running down our eyes. And then I have these, friends who aren't Asian going, why is that funny? But, the author, he had a particular audience that they're writing the books for, that right. And they know what their audience is going to laugh at, even if the rest of the world might not get it. So,
right. So I'm going to actually, on that note, jump down to audience. Working within your reader's world, right? You can use layers to appeal to a wider base. Have some jokes that people get, some people get, and some jokes that all people get. Think about age, youth. Young people won't get historical references, and old people won't get current pop culture references. Occupations, regions, education, literary versus general fiction. You get some of these literary gems that everybody's so agog about, and they win Pulitzer Prizes and everything, and there's jokes in there that I don't get because I don't read all that stuff, And then you talk about language, and one of my favorite examples of a joke for a different culture, right? So I'm eating custard. I'm in Israel, and I've got my host is taking me out to dinner, and I'm eating custard. And I said, this reminds me of a joke. What's yellow and creamy and extremely dangerous? And he says, what? And I said, shark-infested custard. And dead silence, blank stare. And I'm thinking, oh, he's never heard the phrase shark-infested waters. And then he says, shark. Is that some kind of fish? So, I was so far off with that, So I tried to tell a Maine joke to a bunch of Japanese visitors
it went over like a lead balloon. You know, you really have to pay attention to who your audience is. There's also things like language and idioms. There's a thing in Marx Brothers, the Animal Crackers. Groucho Marx says to these two women, "What do you say, girls? What do you say? Are we all going to get married?" And one of them says, "All of us?" And he says, "All of us." And she says, "But that's bigamy." And he says, "Yes, and it's bigamy too." So that's where your wordplay comes
Play
in.
on
You know, you
words.
got that in there. But you have to know the phrase bigamy, and you know, you have to understand how those phrases work. There's also general knowledge. In Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a guy who you first meet him and it's raining, and he picks up a hitchhiker, regular hitchhiker, and he's like, "Oh, it's always raining." He has 47 different definitions for kinds of rain because it's just always raining, and he's down, and he shows up 3 or 4 times through the book, and whenever he's there, it's raining like crazy, and he's just really bummed out about how it rains all the time. But finally, at the end of the book, he gets together with his brother from Seattle, and they go off and they charge resort areas money, you know, protection money, to not go visit them during their high season. Right? But it's his brother from Seattle, right? So you have to know about Seattle, right, in order to get that. So those are sort of the things that by knowing what you're playing with, you can then make jokes about it. Now the other thing is Crary's Law. Crary's Law is that the longer the joke is, the funnier it has to be. So your reaction to something being funny is going to be tempered with how long it took to get there. If it took a really long time to get to the punchline, and the punchline is weak, you're going to think it's terrible. If you go really short and the punchline is weak, you'll still think it's funny because you didn't waste that much time on it, right? You know, the one-liners, the Henny Youngman, you know, "Take my wife, please," right? That's probably the shortest joke I can think of, right? But then there's things like slow builds, and I have a couple that are my favorites. I've been reading a series called the Liturgical Mysteries by Mark Schweitzer, and he like plays around. It's a lot of humor in various ways, but at one point he sets up Tennessee fainting goats. They're in this small town in North Carolina, I think, and somebody has Tennessee fainting goats, and the kids keep, you know, blowing their bike horns near them, and they fall over when that happens, and the lady's all upset about the kids teasing the goats, and so they work the goats in early in the book. And then later in the book, they've got the church is being repaired, and they're going to celebrate the new church thing, and they've got scaffolding all around, and then there's a bagpiper is going to play, and he's up in the bell tower of the church, and he's getting ready to play at some point. And all of a sudden you hear that the goats have gotten out of the pen, and then you find out that the goats are on the roof of the church. And there's this bagpiper we're getting ready to play in the bell tower, right? So that's really pretty funny all in all. And then a little later I'll refer to this again. The best part is that you're sitting there, you just know that sooner or later this guy's going to start playing and the goats are going to fall off the roof. And he finally starts playing, and Mark Schweitzer does not describe the goats falling off the roof. He describes the sound of the goats falling off the roof from inside the church. You just hear and we'll talk about that later in terms of visual images. So that's kind of cool. And then there's one in Gravity's Rainbow, which is this very literary thing where Tyrone Slothrop, he's musing about different puns on the line, "You never did the Kenosha Kid." You know, I've done all those newfangled dances. I've done the Lindy, I've done yeah, but you never did the Kenosha Kid. Mm-hmm. And then he gave maybe 8 variations on this phrase with different kind of interpretations of it. And that's he's thinking of as they put him under for interrogation. They give him some kind of truth serum that makes him kind of fantasize. And he goes out and he has this incredible fantasy. It's 10 pages long. He ends up in a jazz club in Roxbury. He dives down the urinal to get away from like Malcolm X, who's a shoeshine guy, and he meets up all these people, and there's all kinds of literary references, which I don't really get, as he's going through the sewers, and he finally ends up, and he's out in the ocean, and he meets up with this scarred-faced, weird character, and Slothrop says, "Where is he? Why didn't he show? Who are you?" And the voice says, "The kid got busted. And you know me, Slothrop. Remember? I'm Never." And Slothrop, peering, "You? Never? Did the Kenosha Kid?" So he goes through this whole thing. And of course, it's just another pun on the joke. So you can, and the thing that's really kind of funny about that is it's kind of a Shaggy Dog story, and I'll jump ahead to that. Have you ever heard of Shaggy Dog stories? So Shaggy Dog story is you tell this incredibly long story, and it ends with a bad pun like, it's the beer that made Mel Famey walk us, and no, I'm the furry with the syringe on top. It's always some incredible long story that leads to this terrible pun. And the longer, the better. The thing that makes it funny is that it violates Crary's law. You have this incredibly long story, and then the punchline is just a pun, and it's not nearly as funny, and that actually is what's violating your expectations. So it makes it hilarious because it's such an it's not enough humor to warrant the length of the joke. So a couple of other things that you can do. Running gags are great. It allows you quick leverage of a deeper joke. So you have this joke that you've now built up, and now when you repeat it, it's instantaneous. So it makes it effectively much shorter, even though you've got this deep background for it. And then recalls is a classic thing, and you'll see stand-up comics do this all the time. They'll have some joke at the end that goes back to something they talked about in the beginning, and that's, again, a quick shorthand for how to get to it. I had an example of that. Dave Barry column was talking about the Dolphins' Jason Taylor losing on Dancing with the Stars to Christy Yamaguchi early in the column. Then later, he's talking about the quarterback position for the Dolphins. He says, "This has long been a weak spot for the Dolphins, who have started many people at quarterback since Dan Marino left, including at one point Christy Yamaguchi." So he knows how to use a recall.
So we knew this is the fire hose approach that we're giving you. We are just throwing information at you. Your heads are spinning and you're going, ah! And we understand that. It's just that we want to sort of get the material out for you so that you have some things to think about. And that's why everything that we're flashing through is written for you. So you will have this to go home later and to, at your leisure, look at it and say, what was that they said? And so you'll see, when you go home later, that now as we switch, we're going to look at what's actually funny. And we have a long list of things that are funny, and we've tried to group them into categories so that you'll have a sense of how these work. So as Dave and I will sort of go back and forth, maybe interrupt each other as we talk about some of the things you actually hit upon already, and then some which you didn't that will come out now. So, but I just wanted to give you a sense of how this is working as your heads are spinning, because we're speaking so quickly and you can't capture it all. So
the good news for us is that you didn't get anything that we don't have in here.
yeah.
We have more than that, but you didn't get anything we missed. So. Exaggeration is one of them, obviously. Just the wrong scale. Too big, too small, overreact, underreact. Revealing the obvious, going to great effort to reveal something that's plainly obvious, or totally understating something that's unbelievably complex. I do that a lot. I have all this technical stuff that's fake. I make up terrible inventions and things, and I just toss them off as, like global warming is caused by daylight savings time, that extra hour of sunlight.
Yeah.
And off I go, right? Satire is just the truth amplified, actually. And it's only really funny if you dislike the victim, as it turns out. But that's what that's all about. I really enjoyed preparing for this because I knew I wanted to see this thing. And I'm going to describe, by the way, some things in movies and other stuff because they're funny. It doesn't matter that it's not the written word. You can still use these kind of techniques. There's a guy named Super Dave Osborne, he did this show where he was a stunt guy, and his stunts always screwed up. And he was diving off a high platform, and in between diving off the platform toward his trampoline or his net, he's halfway down and he's way off to the side, and he says, "I missed it." Bam, smashes into the ground, right? But it's just this really calm, "I missed it." How many people have seen the movie Airplane? So Lloyd Bridge is an airplane, he's like, "Looks like I picked the wrong week to give up smoking," he says. And then it's the next wrong week to give up drinking. And then it's amphetamines, and then it's like sniffing glue, right? He's just going off the deep end.
And then hyperbole, you know, we picked a wonderful quote from Paul Bunyan. This was a book that I had read to my kids when they were younger, and it's so funny because he says, one winter it was so cold, all the geese flew backward, all the fish moved south, and even the snow turned blue, you know, and then he goes on. But, you know, the reason we laugh is because it's just the absurdity of it all, you know, just sort of going over the top and exaggerating purposefully, you know, for the laughter and to really make people realize that it was really cold that winter, you know. But he does it in a funny way so that children, you know, because you imagine little children sitting there going, what?
Right.
The snow turned blue, and you know, and then they get all caught up and engaged in it. So.
Right. There's some absurdity there.
Yeah.
So the next one we had down is called seriousness, but I realized, and I'm gonna add something on.
Yeah.
This is really actually more like healthiness, gentility. But in my book, there's a vicious battle in an organic grocery that's full of wholesome or, you know, healthy products. So there's these people fighting, you know, like really trying to hurt each other in this health food store, and that's the incongruity, right? And the line is, you know, as Lynn jerked her head down, a family-sized jar of Mother Carmela's all-natural comfort balm whizzed past her shoulder and crushed into the side of the baker's head, right? This guy getting bashed by a number 10 jar of comfort balm. But I realized that, you know, so I'm talking about seriousness, and by the way, another example of that is like the movie Ted, where you've got this teddy bear, and he's a cursing, drinking, smoking, you know, sexist, just this incredibly raunchy character, but he's a teddy bear, you know, and that's the dichotomy there. For seriousness, though, this came up on my feed, maybe it's come up on other people's feed. I'm going to demonstrate this. If I stand, will I still be on the video? Can I do that? I really want to stand. So this is a Carol Burnett show video, and Harvey Korman and Tim Conway and Vicki Lawrence are there's this elegant setting, and they're in tuxedos and evening gown, and they're standing very formally, and they turn and look, and Carol Burnett comes out in a beautiful evening gown, and she stands just off to the side, and they're all standing there very, very, very formally standing, and they proceed to lip sync to the song In the Mood, as performed by chickens. It's hilarious, but then they maintain this absolute seriousness. At one point, they kind of march around a little bit, but they're doing this, you know. And it's spectacular example of the dichotomy between serious and funny. And by the way, it has to do with chickens and the sound buck, 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 which we'll come to later.
Yeah.
So, you want to do roles? Talk about roles? Or?
No, you can do that.
Oh, okay, so I've seen a bunch of places that, you know, there's a movie, escaped convicts posing as priests. You know, as soon as you take someone and put them in a different role than what they're supposed to be, men and women as each other, you know, Shakespeare, half of Shakespeare's comedies are based on that. And any mistaken identity or disguise an opportunity to let the real character slip out, which is a really neat technique. There's this fantastic thing, Carl Hyacin, one of my favorite comedy writers, native tongue. Joe Winder is this detective, and he's, reporter detective type. He's going undercover as a costumed animal mascot in a theme park. And he gets pulled into a live TV interview with Willard Scott of the Today Show. And this is how it goes. And an awakening nation heard the famous weatherman say, "This ring-tailed rascal is one of the most popular characters here at the amazing Kingdom of Thrills. Go ahead, tell us your name." And in a high, squeaky voice, Joe Winder gamely replied, "Hi, Willard, my name is Robbie Raccoon." "You're certainly a big fella, Robbie. Judging by the size of that tummy, I'd say you've been snooping through a few garbage cans." To which Robbie Raccoon responded, "Look who's talking, lardass." I'll tell you, I was sitting on a plane when I read that, and I just I totally disturbed the entire section when I read that line. So,
Yeah, one of the other forms of humor is irony, which, you know, any of you who are parents know that we use that a lot with children, you know, in responses to them. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. I love, you know, her literature, and she really understood human nature and has a lot of humor in her pieces. And in Pride and Prejudice, are folks familiar with Pride and Prejudice? The mother hysterical, because she has these nerves, you know, that all throughout the book, everything upsets her nerves. And there's a scene where, you know, she's like complaining to the husband, you don't understand my nerves, you know, and his response is, "You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least," you know. And you know, and what's so funny is that it goes over the mother who, you know, doesn't even understand that, you know, the husband has just, in a sense, you know, insulted her, you know. And then Dave Barry, as you know, our Dave already mentioned, you know, has lots of humor in his column, and in one of them he says, "Taylor is, of course, the Dolphin star line person. He's also considering a career in show business since he has a kind of chiseled GQ-style looks and big muscles that my wife has repeatedly assured me she does not find attractive," you know? You know? And, you know, and of course all the women laugh because, you know,
yeah, the guys laugh too. It's a painful thing. And by the way, there's a case of knowing your world, right?
Yes, yeah, you know, so, do you want to do sarcasm? Or do you want me to do it?
Sure.
So, I don't know, are folks familiar with The Fault in Our Stars? It's actually a pretty serious book, you know. You know, there's a girl who finds out she has cancer, you know, and is dying, and she's dealing with this. But there's a line where she's, you know, talking to one of the characters, you know, which is essentially the doctor, and he goes, "Thank you for explaining that my eye cancer is not going to make me deaf. I feel so fortunate that an intellectual giant like yourself would deign to operate on me," you know? And there's a lot of, you know, sarcastic one-liners that's coming from this teenage girl that helps to bring some levity to a really serious, you know, book. And so, and there's a spot where we'll talk about later about how you take the difficulties of the world and use humor to sort of diffuse them in your writing. So,
another thing, we talked about comparisons, and I'm not sure if that's the right word for this, but, you know, funny similes or metaphors, and to me, I think this example that Paula came up with is really a matter of taking a metaphor literally, and that's because you're not supposed to do that, and I think that's where the incongruity comes in. This is from the Fairy Queen's Deception. It's, is it Delia? Is that how you say it? Delia. Delia was an overbearing cake with condescending frosting, and frankly, I was on a diet. So that, you know, it's a funny metaphor, right, or simile, I guess. Well, it's a metaphor because they didn't say is like. And so it's a funny metaphor because you think of this, you know, giant cake. But then to top it off with "I was on a diet" just totally makes it's changing the way he's using a metaphor. Impossibility, you know, this can't happen. If you die, I'll kill you. You know, the kind of line. There's a great one in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is these guys are up in a spaceship and they're way up above the planet, and these incoming missiles get transformed by the infinite improbability drive into a whale and a bowl of petunias. Improbable, I guess, but not impossible. But anyway, there's a famous thing. The whale has this monologue because it just appeared in existence. What am I? Blah blah blah, and then it crashes to the surface and dies. And that's the end of its life. But then the next thing he says, curiously enough, the only thing that went through the mind of the bowl of petunias as it fell was, "Oh no, not again." Many people have speculated that if we knew exactly why the bowl of petunias had thought that, we would know a lot more about the nature of the universe than we do now. Wait, you know, that's like so many levels of impossibility. It's really amazing. So, anyway, then there's meta jokes. I'm a fan of meta jokes. A lot of people maybe not so much. So be careful about it. But Meta joke is where you're joking, you're referencing your story from outside the story. It's like breaking the third wall or the fourth wall in theater. The Broadway production of Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance, the hero is fighting, sword fighting, and he loses his sword, and he turns around in panic, and the conductor down in the orchestra hands him his baton, and the guy takes the baton and goes back in and starts fighting again, One of the most hilarious moments in the musical Urinetown, I don't know how many people have seen the musical Urinetown, but there's this chase scene at the end of the first act, and the revolutionaries are running away, and the cops are chasing them, and it's going boom, 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 boom is the music, and they're running like this in slow motion, and they're like, well, are we going to catch them? He says, we could catch them if only we weren't running so damn slowly. It's just beautiful stuff.
So we had failed to mention that these are under categories. So, the stuff that we just went through was things that are incongruous with one another. So now we're going to switch to kind of, failure, making fun of things. And as a general rule, what do we teach our children? Don't make fun of people. It's mean. But it also can be funny if it's done in a way that's not too mean, and so we're going to look at some of the things. So first is slapstick, just slapstick humor. We talked earlier about the Three Stooges. I mean, how many people hysterically laugh, at the Three Stooges, but it's their slapstick physical humor that makes people laugh. There's a children's book, I don't know if people have read this, I love it. It's President Taft is Stuck in the Bath. Now, for folks who know their history, President Taft is our heaviest president, that we've had, in the past. And so there's this hysterical children's book where President Taft is stuck in a bathtub and the cabinet members are trying all sorts of things to get him out of this tub. And the illustrator did a marvelous job. Did you ever read the book?
I saw the
illustrator did a marvelous job. I mean, and for like a 4, 5, 6-year-old, this is hysterical, and it's embedded in it. It teaches a little bit about history, about this president, and then Dave put in the Coyote and the Roadrunner. For those of us who are old enough to know that cartoon, I don't know. I guess there are stations that run the old cartoons, so maybe the new generation knows it. But the things that happen to the coyote make everybody laugh because the Roadrunner is completely innocent, and so we feel like he deserves all the things that that he gets as we're laughing at the poor coyote, who's getting caught in all these things. So here you go.
Yeah, there's also farce, and farce is one of my favorite things, and the real, to me, the definition of farce is that the viewer, in the case of a theater thing, but in the case of a book, the reader knows what's going on, but the characters don't. So when you get this, so in Ken Ludwig's Lend Me a Tenor is one of my favorite scenes in a farce. There's an opera star, Tito, has been out cold and in his drunk or drugged or I don't remember what, but he's out cold. He's missed the performance, and somebody else. It was like Iago or something. He put on blackface and went out or Othello and went out and stood in for him. But he doesn't know that. And this actress, Diana, was his co-star out on stage, and she didn't realize that it wasn't him. So she thought she was out on stage with him. And she comes to his room after the show, and she's thinking it's him on stage with her, and he thinks, it sets up that he thinks he made love to her. And he doesn't remember. So he's thinking he made love to her. She's asking him, she wants to know the truth about how her performance was on stage. So,
and he's thinking, other type of things.
So we're gonna do this, right? So she's Diana, I'm Tito, right?
Was I good tonight? I can take it. Believe me, Tito, I'm a professional.
Oh my God, a professional? This profession, you take it pretty serious, eh?
It's all I've ever wanted to be since I was a little girl. Isn't that awful?
It's terrible.
Of course, my mother was in the business.
Ah.
And my father, too.
Your father?
I guess you could say it's in my blood.
You got something in your blood? So that whole thing goes on. There's a lot more to it than that, but you know, it's the conversation happening on stage where the two characters everything is a double entendre and both of them are misinterpreting what the other person's saying is one of the more hilarious things you can do. I do it in my books a lot. It's just a lot of fun. So highly recommended technique.
And then puns, you know, we talked about the shaggy dog pun, you know, but in Alice in Wonderland, you know, you have the pun on the mouse talking about tail, T-A-L-E, versus Alice thinking that he's talking about tail, T-A-I-L. And, you know, that type of humor is funny for, you know, children and for adults as you realize that they're mistaking what the words are, you
Right.
know, so.
Yeah, there's a book, this whole thing about making there's a book, and it's not in here, and you don't need to look it up, but he's basically, the French guy has a theory that all humor is us making fun of someone inferior or someone who messes up. It's our way of punishing people who mess up. And in fact, when we just get the wrong impression and suddenly we change, we're laughing at ourselves for being mistaken early in the thing. We're the ones that screwed up. And his point about puns is that in the puns, it's the language that's screwing up. The language can't determine the difference between these two words. And that's why it's not as funny, because language isn't as funny to make fun of as people are, right? Any switch where the reader makes a mistaken assumption, most jokes are like this. They lead you one way and try to get you to think of it as this, and then when they reveal the punchline, you've changed it. One of my favorite movie scenes is in The Naked Gun. Leslie, how many people have seen the Naked Gun movies? Any of them? They're kind of like Airplane. Leslie Nielsen again. He's a cop, and he at one point he takes the place of an opera singer, Enrico Palazzo, and he's out there singing it terribly, of course, because it's a comedy, and he sings the national anthem for the whole crowd at this baseball game. And then later he changes clothes, he impersonates, he conks an umpire on the head, and he puts on his mask and goes out, and he's in this mask and he's the umpire, and a bunch of funny things happen there. But finally, like, Reggie Jackson's gonna assassinate the Queen from right field, and he figures it out and he stops Reggie Jackson from assassinating the Queen. And everybody's like, oh, he saved the Queen, right? And people are like really excited and cheering. And he steps up, you know, to the adoration of the crowd as he saved the Queen, and he pulls off his mask, and the fans are just shocked and just awed to realize that the umpire is actually the cop. Except that's not what they say. Somebody says, look, it's Enrico Palazzo. Oh man, I was watching that on video. I fell right off the couch. It was great. And they really set it up well. It was like this, oh, look. So,
That reminds me of that Craig Ferguson movie with the marijuana and everything, and everyone's running around. Do you know it?
I'm not familiar with it.
No.
He has a movie. Yeah.
Well, and you know, in the movies, you know, it's really easy to have humor because you have the physical elements, you know, you can use the facial expressions. You know, for those of us who are writers, we have to write that in. And so, you know, so that's why we tried to, as much as possible, give you examples from literature so that you can see how people have done it. And that allows you to have something that you can copy, you know, a model for it. Because, you know, it is a little bit harder in writing because you have to think about which elements people need to know. Do they need to know what the people look like? Do they need to know what's happening in the situation? Or is it just a play on words that would do it? And so it
Right.
becomes a little bit more complicated than in-person or movie humor. But the next section
Well,
is...
wait, before you
okay.
get into that, that's a really good point. What I found in the case of, so you talked about farce, where people have different impressions of what's going on. There's a thing in writing about point of view, and I tend to write in third person something point of view, where basically you're in someone's point of view, but it's not first person. You're still describing it as third person, but you definitely have a point of view character. And I will switch points of view in order to hide information, to give information to the reader, but hide it from this other character. So that's how you do it, right? In a theater, you have them see something when the other guy's not on stage, but in books, you can use point of view to hide that. So that's one of the reasons why I tend to switch point of view, because now you go to a point of view of someone who's clueless about what's really going on, and then it can be really funny to see how they interpret what's happening to them at that time. Okay, so back to...
So yeah, so now just funny things are funny. There are just some things that are just naturally funny. So do you want to do
there's characters can be funny. There's fools, the Three Stooges, et cetera, types, the fools or wits. People in Oscar Wilde comedies tend to be very witty types. I've noticed, and because I've been reading all these books, and people say, oh, this is a funny book. I've read a bunch of what you'd call chick lit comedies, and it seems like in many of them, at least the ones that are really funny, the humor comes from a very witty, self-deprecating narrator. She doesn't think she's all that great. She doesn't, but she's really got a hilarious sense of humor. So the comedy is in her descriptions of what's going on to her. And then she tends to get herself into trouble, so there's physical humor and all kinds of stuff like that. I had a character in my Urban Legion. I have these bad guy French waiters, these evil French waiters, and one of them is he's a real tough guy, but he's got a really bad grasp of English, so he's always mangling the language. And at one point he kicks a hole in a drywall, in a wall, and he says, there is no secret entrance here. I am a mistake. So I make fun of that guy a lot.
And then just situations, wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time. We're familiar with a lot of Shakespeare's tragedies, but he has this hysterical comedy that's actually called the Comedy of Errors, where he has double sets of twins. And it's just funny because, people don't know that there's these double sets of twins. And so they're coming in and out of these situations. And he does a marvelous job of just setting up the humor in it. There's a Love Creeps. There's this gentleman who he comes into a class and he sits down and he's the only person there. And the person up front starts talking and teaching about how he's going to talk about the goddess within. And so there's a point where the man gets up, starts tiptoeing out, and the teacher goes, "Where are you going?" "I'm sorry, I thought this class was how to access the goodness within, not the goddess within," and
Wrong place.
wrong place, wrong time, a man trying to access the goddess within, and so, and then funny sounds, I don't know if you want to do this.
I'll do this one. I'll love to do this one. So some words and sounds are funny. Hard K and G's, hard G's are funny. And there's a scene in The Sunshine Boys, Neil Simons, where Willie's talking to his nephew. He says, 57 years in this business, you learn a few things. You know what words are funny and which words are not funny. Alka-Seltzer is funny. You say Alka-Seltzer, you get a laugh. Words with K in them are funny. Casey Stengel, that's a funny name. Robert Taylor is not funny. Cupcake is funny. Tomato is not funny. Cookie is funny. Cucumber is funny. Car keys. Cleveland. Cleveland is funny. Maryland is not funny. Then there's chicken. Chicken is funny. Pickle is funny. Cab is funny. Cockroach is funny. Not if you get them, only if you say them. So, the whole thing about the chicken, the buck, 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 it's chicken. And when I said chickens, you guys all laughed because the word chicken is funny. And then buck, buck, buck is even funnier because it's got the K and it's got, so, And if you're just looking at a line and you want to make it funnier, look for those kinds of words to put in there.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to read the alliteration one.
No, but just, people are familiar with Dr. Seuss, and he has a lot of funny literature like Lucky Luke, which is just all L's, and he keeps playing on, and he does both. He uses the alliteration, and then he plays on all the words, so that by the time you're at the den, you're just like hysterically laughing because you were trying to read this to your children, and you just couldn't get it straight.
Yeah, I guess that's actually where the humor is Dad trying to read this. Luke Luck likes lakes. Luke's duck likes lakes. Luke Luck licks lakes. Luke's duck licks lakes. Duck takes licks in lakes Luke Luck likes. Luke Luck takes licks in lakes, duck likes. I did it. Wow, that's amazing. I like to do this a lot, actually. Word reuse, and especially if the meaning changes. There's a book called The Sheriff of Urnamir. Urnamir is like, all the planets have been named for ads, and so Urnamir means nobody's bought that planet yet. But a guy, Cole, he's just been rejected by the woman he loves in this intergalactic bar. He gave her a ring, and she gave it back. He hurled the ring away. It struck a very large alien, and he has the very large alien is in capital, in initial caps. It struck a very large alien. "Rawr," said the very large alien. "Just get on the ship. Get on the ship and go. Just get the hell out of here." Cole wiped his nostrils and held his hand up to his one functioning eye to confirm that his nose was still bleeding from where the very large alien had casually flicked him with a very large finger. And the very large finger, of course, is the capitalized. So just taking a word, using it again. I've had editors that said, "Wait, you used this word already." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And it's like I said, especially if you take that very large and just change the alien to finger, it gives it something there. We talked earlier about just putting funnier words in, skedaddle instead of hurry, or bamboozle instead of mislead. You really want to just kind of use funnier words where you can. If you're trying to be serious, you use serious words. But if you're trying to be funny, and it's kind of a clue to the reader that you're not being serious. I talked about this image of
that most folks are familiar with is the comedy rule of three, where you set up two things that sort of are going the way you think they are, and then you twist them, on the end. And so this is one of my favorite ones. It's a Mark Twain quote, "Reader, suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress. But I repeat myself, and it's the twist." Yep. And then this is, we've got a lot of Dave Barry because, he really is a very, very funny gentleman. But he says, "When we analyze the American healthcare system, we see that the most important questions facing us as a nation are, how should we pay for healthcare? Who should make our healthcare decision? And what's this weird little skin thing on my right finger that won't go away?"
Right. Yeah, Dave Barry is almost so transparent in his use of all these standard joke things. It's really pretty wonderful. He also establishes a trend of things like he talks about, and I came to the unescapable conclusion, weird little skin thing would make a great name for a rock band. Yeah. He's always coming up with names for a rock band, and then he'll pull something out of the column for that. So. And the other thing that's interesting, and as I said, I don't know, I didn't listen. The receptionist, punchline, punch word at the end. Put the punchline right at the end. Work whatever you have to do to get the joke to be the last word, the last few words of the paragraph, whatever. Because if you have anything after the punchline, it's worthless. So
as we apologized already, this is a lot. This is just us throwing all this information at you. But now you can pull out the second packet that we gave you, which has all of the examples that we just spoke about. What we'd like you to do is, look through a couple of them and think maybe some of you have things you've been working on that you might want to inject humor, or maybe you just want to create a little scene right now. We thought maybe you could pick something. Incongruity, a funny person, puns, slapstick, pick one of these techniques for creating humor, and we're going to give you about 10 minutes to write, just a tiny little, scene, an attempt at something that you think might be humorous in writing. And you have the examples which you can use. Feel free to just plagiarize and switch, do a rule of three and switch the punchline at the end, because this is not something you're going to be publishing. This is just, to give you a little bit of practice, to actually see, can you use some of these techniques that have been presented. Does that make sense? questions about that. So you can also take this time if you want. You know, there's some snacks and tea, and the bathrooms are, if you go to the right and then down the left to the hallway, there are, you know, ladies' rooms. So we'll give you about 15 minutes so that you have about 10 minutes of writing, about 5 minutes to sort of take a break, and then at about noon time, we will see, you know, what folks have written, and if anyone's brave enough to share, then we could, you know, talk about some of the pieces and, you know, what makes it funny or not, you know. So sounds good? Okay, so we'll take,
Great.
so you can start writing, you can take a mini break, and then at noon we will reconvene. The purpose of this workshop is just a general workshop to give you information. This is the tools for how people think about humor. Next week, for folks who want to join the intensive, you can sign up for the intensive, where if you have something you're working on, you can bring a short excerpt from it, and Dave and I will work through with you on your personal pieces how and where you can inject humor. We do have 3 folks signed up. There is space for, you know, 2 or 3 more if you're interested. But that's a place where you'll actually have time to actually put some of these tools into effect, as opposed to the general workshop, which this workshop is just trying to get information out to people for folks who are thinking, well, I want to write humor, but I don't even know how to think about this. You know, how do I even comprehend what's funny? And so what we've given you is all of the things that are out there in the world, you know, that people agree can make for good humor. And so you have those examples, and then you can use them for yourself. And you can use what we've given you to do more research if you'd like, since this is just a general blast. So just really quickly, some final general advice things. One is conflict is always a good place for humor in writing, in movies, in real life. We all know that, you know, when you're in the middle of something that's difficult, sometimes humor makes you think about it in a different way. Sometimes humor allows you to diffuse the situation. There's this old joke that a woman gets on a bus with her baby, and the bus driver says, "That's the ugliest baby I've ever seen." Now that's hard. Nobody wants to hear that your baby's like ugly. You know, you're going to get offended. You're going to be upset. You know, this is a conflict, you know, from the beginning. And so the woman walks to the rear of the bus. She sits down. She's fuming. She says to the man, "You know, that driver just insulted me." And the man says, "You go up there and tell him off. Go on. I'll hold your monkey for you." And it's one of those things that, you know, I mean, you sit there and you think, oh, that's terrible, you know. But it helps people to think about, you know, how do we interact with people? How do we, you know, find the line between truth and, you know,
maybe my baby really is ugly.
Yeah,
you know?
no, so, you know, the other thing is when you're writing, you know, you often, unless you're like Dave, where you're intentionally writing a humorous book, you know, your purpose is to just write humor from beginning to end. Most of us are writing short stories, personal essays, you know, nonfiction pieces, novels, where we want to balance the humor and the serious elements. And so, you know, we have to think very carefully in our books, where do we want the humor? So that's, you know, J.K. Rowling in her Harry Potter series, often she injects humor in those moments when kids might be frightened because something bad's about to happen. And she does that purposely so that if she's got, you know, an 8, 9, 10-year-old reading her novel, it diffuses some of the intensity of what's happening. So you think strategically about it. And this is just Dessert First, Dean Gloucester. He says, "I've thought a lot about what happens when we die, and I'm pretty sure it's not reincarnation. No loving and merciful God would put us through high school twice." No, I mean, and again, it's a serious issue.
Well, yeah, in fact, this statement is like, this is the opening sentence of the book.
Yeah.
And it's establishing very, very nicely what's going to go on with this character. It's going to be a high school, it's going to be a battle or a coming of age kind of thing where you're dealing with high school, but it's introduced with humor. So you now instantly like the character a little more. They've got a good sense of where they are in the universe and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a really great way to introduce a character, introduce what the theme of the book is going to be, and still make you laugh all in the same sentence. It's really pretty nicely done.
Another thing is your humor should be organic within the story. Dave's talked a lot about you can't force humor, so you need to figure out where you're going to put it. So again, with J.K. Rowling, she has used her characters, that the humor tends to come in the dialogue and through the conversation that's happening. So think about your stories and where it's going to be. Do you want to give
I had a theater director, so I write for theater, so I'm very sensitive to what the author is trying to get across. And there was a director of one of the plays that my group did, the play was Cemetery Club, and there was a woman, she had gone shopping and she held up 2 pears that she had bought, and she said, "Look, I've got a pear," holding them in front of her chest. And it was a laugh, right? And it was a cheap laugh. And but the character was, of the 3 women who were all mourning their dead husbands, she was the unbelievably serious character. She just couldn't get out of this seriousness of it, and it totally took her. It did not work with her character at all. It was totally inorganic, and it was like, no, you shouldn't have done that. The author did not want you to do that.
Yeah, and so so our next piece of advice is always get feedback. If you're writing humor, if you're writing at all, you should always have beta readers. But but if you're trying to inject humor into your pieces, make sure you get feedback from beta readers, from family, friends. If someone gets offended by what you thought was funny, you might want to think about that. And that's the other thing we were talking briefly with the front table about satire. That satire is one of those things you have to know in which genres to use it, and how to be careful, because satire, part of the humor in it is often at someone else's expense. And so you always need to be careful, about how you use it, because if it's at someone else's expense, it means it's not funny to the people who, you're being satirical, about. And so
and it's often not funny to anybody. It's just sad, about the funny times.
Yeah. Right? So and then the other thing is know when to use good taste, because there are some things that are funny that aren't very tasteful.
Right.
They're kind of crude, and so subtle is always better than crude, unless you're writing a specific type of piece that, where it's organic and it makes sense and it sort of fits in.
Right.
So, a lot of like Monty Python and some, others along his lines, they'll inject some things that some of us might think are crude, but it fits with the nature of, the piece that he's doing, so.
So that actually reminds me, earlier, there's a thing in the outline that I did not include in the examples, because I thought I would just mention it. But when you talk about incongruent, and this brings to mind this good taste thing, it brings to mind the thing. There's a thing called two-list method. If you're writing something that's a comic piece, you're doing jokes for late night TV or whatever, you take 2 lists of things that don't go together, and you figure out how to combine them. So you're basically just creating incongruous matches as you go along. I use this, I do the announcements before our shows. I run a theater company, and so I come out and I do announcements. Fire exits, no smoking, the bathrooms are in the lobby to the right, go to the concession stand, recycle your programs, all those kinds of things. And a long time ago, I got into doing that as a skit. So I would be a character, and I would be delivering it as in some kind of theme that's related to the play. So depending on what the play is, I would come out as a down east Maine fisherman, or I'd be a tour guide in Iran, or I'd be whatever it is, and I would then say, okay, here's the list of things. The bathrooms are in the lobby to the right, and the blah, 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 and here's the list of things that are about the theme, okay? Lobstermen, hate Massachusetts tourists, blah, 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 go all the way down the line, and then come up with jokes that match. And I deliver this thing, and I deliver all the information, but it comes in a fairly funny way, and people now show up, they're like, sometimes that's better than the show. And I'm like, I hate to say that, but you know, it's true. But the thing that I've found is that the funniest jokes are the bathroom jokes.
Yeah.
You know, I did a Shakespeare thing. I was in full regalia. I was, you know, to draw forth thy cell phones and with a bold stroke silence them, you know. And then I got to the restrooms are in the lobby, so that to pee or not to pee is never a question. And that's always the biggest laugh is the bad taste joke, you know, the toilet humor. So yeah, you know, use it sparingly.
That reminds me, actually the first joke I ever heard as a little kid was one my brother told me. He says, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" And then my brother goes, "In the bushes, throw me the toilet paper." And you know, I was like 8, you know, and hysterical
That's
laughing.
still hilarious to me, I'm sorry.
So did anybody take some of the time to try and write a little something using any of the techniques that...
Anybody that
You
would
raise your
like
hand in
to
the back?
share?
Anybody? So for the folks who did try it, would anyone like to share what you tried to do and share which technique you used? So either of you?
I'd be glad to.
Sure.
Okay, my goal here, I'm a parent and a teacher, and over the years I've put together notebooks of little places where I learned something, usually from my children,
Yeah.
about how to do better. And so I have all these stories, and they're kind of lessons to be learned from a mother, and I've tried to write them up, but I tend to be a serious person, so it's too heavy.
Yeah.
So, should I read what?
Yeah,
I just heard.
First,
Yeah.
let us know which
No,
technique.
I don't want to do that. I
You
want
don't
to hear
want
it first.
Okay, you want to hear it first?
We
Okay.
should-
I hear what I wrote.
I want to hear
Yeah,
what you wrote
first, okay,
first
and then
before I
say-
hear the
Everything
explanation.
is the last line.
Okay.
Okay. The day after Julie was born, I lay in the hospital bed, Julie in my arms. At last, everything was quiet, and we were alone together. I had gotten a good night's sleep. My body was occupied making all the miraculous adjustments necessary after delivery. I looked at my daughter's tiny fingers, the itsy-bitsy fingernails, the creases in the skin around her wrists, her beautiful, perfect skin. I had done everything possible I could to ensure that she would be healthy. Eating a balanced diet, no alcohol, regular checkups, all had gone well. I had taught children with disabilities the thought of their heartache. Julie looked straight in my eyes, and I looked deep into hers. I was looking into my child's brand new soul, and then it washed over me, totally unexpected. I knew that no one would ever be capable of loving her as completely and as fully as I did, and that my actions had brought this child into the world, and that I was completely responsible for her. The responsibility overwhelmed me. Could I measure up? I was completely responsible for her life. It was on me to raise her to be a happy, healthy, confident person who would be the best person she could be. The responsibility was overwhelming. Then I opened my baby's first, then I opened my baby's first poopy diaper. It was green.
Sorry.
I guess I lost it.
No.
No.
See, that's really excellent because you didn't spend a whole lot of time on it. It was green. Says so much compared to all all this heavy duty stuff and everything. It's just like you didn't say it smelled bad. You didn't say, oh, it was surprisingly not the color I expected. It was green, and that just communicated an enormous amount of information in a very short time.
So we just came back to reality. I guess I was getting more and more caught up. And, realizing what a heavy responsibility is just in what parenting, the responsibility of parenting and how serious that is. But then, in reality, it's about changing the diaper.
Yeah, well, and I think too, in terms of like I laughed when you were talking in the piece, the narrator was talking about doing all the right things through the pregnancy. I didn't do alcohol, I did, and if for me as a reader, I think, you know, the humor would have struck a little bit more emphatically if maybe what came before it was a little bit shorter, you know, that if, you know, the narrator had focused simply on, you know, I was doing all the right things to take care of my daughter, you know, continuing with that list, and then say I opened her poopy diaper and it was green, then you get that juxtaposition of, you know,
So get there sooner.
yeah, you know, that we're not expecting, well, and also making the juxtaposition between all the things that the mother thinks she's doing right and then the green poopy diaper, you know. And,
Right.
but that would also, part of it is the audience too, because if people haven't had children, they don't realize that the first couple of poopy diapers are the meconium and it's supposed to be green, you know. So, you know, so if people don't have that context, then they sometimes lose the humor as well. What were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I think to your point, you started with the I did everything right, and then I'm going to have total responsibility for this child, and then the green, you know, so there was that section in the middle, but I'm not sure you want to take that out because that just raises the whole thing to such a life challenge level, you know, so the contrast here is between I'm going to be responsible for making sure this person has a tremendous life and goes to college and everything like that, and then it shrinks down to I got to deal with a green poopy diaper, you know. That's the,
Dog?
what's that?
Is it a shaggy dog?
No.
Story with a little pun, like,
No, if it had a pun,
Yeah.
yes,
so,
but
were you going to say something, Ray?
No, I just want to insert that, so kind of thinking about what makes me laugh and all that, and I think in humor, it doesn't always have to be a ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
It can be, that's funny,
right.
Yeah.
you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah, that's
So
that's
it depends on.
Yeah. Smiles
Like, that's an
instead of a laugh.
example
Yeah.
of, I didn't laugh, but I'm thinking, that's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so it accomplishes the goal.
right. You thought it bombed because nobody burst out laughing, but
Right.
that was more of a like an oh wow.
I
It was-
guess the relief is what I put in.
Yeah.
When they talk about this overwhelming responsibility I was feeling.
Yeah.
It has a much more it's much more fundamental humor
Yeah.
that what you just did there. It's a life situation thing. It's not a surprise as much as it's a oh yeah, this is the reality of life, and it's an amusing way to present it. So
And amusement is good too,
It
you know,
is.
as you know, Ray said, not laugh out loud laughter, but something that, you know, makes people sort of, you know, be a little bit happy for a moment is a good
So
thing.
it's not too heavy then?
So, no.
You don't think this whole responsibility thing was not too, like, I don't want to appear pumping myself up about being
No.
this perfect parent.
you could compress that part. I wouldn't take it out, but you could compress it to get to the humor quicker,
Yeah.
to get to the punchline quicker, if you will.
Yeah.
So by the way, if you're doing things like that, like lots of them, I hope you're going to turn that into a blog and then a book, because that's a great concept. I would think a lot of people would go for that.
Yeah, but
There's someone I'm thinking about that used to write books like household stories, you know? It was like,
Irma Bombeck
Yeah,
wrote a
that's-
lot
Exactly.
of, she did,
Yep.
you know, a lot of
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
Yep.
So, would you like to share?
Sure. I think it's called New Year's Lack of Resolution. I spent every waking second of 2019 on a quest to find my lost passwords. So much so that this thwarted quest poisoned my sleep. Last night I dreamt I passed away without a word. As I ascended the rickety escalator to heaven, when I finally reached the pearly gates, I peek in there, and there they all are, my lost passwords, snuggling in the feathers of their guardian angel's wings. And that St. Peter, he's such a colossal asshole. He's lurking there like he's God's gift to heaven. And heaven's this most exclusive bar, and he's the bouncer. And he makes me cough up my password before I can creep in there and abscond with my lifetime supply of lost passwords. So I have to have a lost password to get to my lost password, which is basically exactly the way I spent 2019. I think it's funny.
That's hilarious. You use so many great techniques in there. You know, you have, first of all, you put passwords lounging in heaven, which is kind of weird. You got St. Peter being God's gift to heaven, which is a great twist on a familiar phrase, right? You used it in a different way.
And passed without a word.
Yeah, and you know, St. Peter, the asshole that he is, you know, you're really taking this holy good thing and turning him into a bouncer who's an asshole, and so that's a nice contrast of things that don't. No, that was actually from start to finish. The title was hilarious, was good. So. No, but again, it's not. You're going to get a laugh when you totally surprise somebody. You're going to get amusement when you relate funny things, when you do incongruities, right? And so you did that all the way through. That was a nice level of humor through the entire thing. But you didn't have a sudden, oh, we got that wrong before, now we know what you're talking about. And if you're not going for that, it's okay. You might get, I mean, I write novels and I might get 5 or 6 of those in the whole novel. The rest of it is, as my wife says, you're not a humorist, you're an amusist.
Yeah. And it's also, again, it comes back to audience. You know, like I laughed, you know, in the one line where the narrator says, in my dream I passed without a word. And it had started with talking about passwords, so that play on the words made me laugh because, you know, I wasn't expecting that. And so, you know, it's one of those things that different people are going to respond differently to the humor. You know, like I talked about the Crazy Rich Asians, you know, I mean, that's the most hysterical, you know, book to me, but other people read it and like, I don't see why this is funny, but it's because they don't live it, you know, they don't know that that's actually my aunt, and that's my mother, and that's, you know, I mean, you know.
And by the way, that, you know, I mentioned earlier that all the chick lit comedies that I've read tended to have a narrator voice, which was kind of exactly what you just did, right? Here's someone who can't remember her passwords, but she's describing her problems with remembering passwords in an incredibly witty way, right? So that's a great example of that kind of book, and they're pretty popular apparently. So.
Anybody else want to share?
Yeah.
I was having coffee with Barbara and invited her and Ron to dinner to celebrate our 35th anniversary. She said they would love to come, and she would wear the dress she bought for the prom. I stared at her and said, "You've had a prom dress in your closet 40 years? After a moment, she said, no, only 1 year. I was going to chaperone my daughter's prom." We both had a good laugh.
There you go.
I was thinking more, she fits into the prom dress, you know? You know, so it was good to find out that it was a recent one because I was going to be sad. You know? So,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, you know, if ways to, if you wanted to play that up, you know, so here you have a great farcical situation. If the reader knew that that Barbara had been the chaperone at the prom, and the narrator doesn't know that she's a chaperone at the prom, and she's like, you know, wow, you still fit in that dress? You know, well, I haven't gained that much weight. You know, what do you mean? You've gained 40 pounds since high school, you know. But you never say since high school. You say you've gained 40 pounds. I haven't gained that much, you know. It's only, you know, she knows it's only been like, and if you make it kind of more plausible, like it's been a year since the chaperoning versus 20 years since the high school, you know, you can play around with that.
it's kind of like the lend me a tenor one, you know, where it's that those 2 levels of conversation that's happening that you could tease out a little bit more would definitely add to the humor in the piece. So.
Right. And by the way, I would not put the line in there, "We both had a good laugh."
Yeah.
You don't need that. Your punchline was right before that, and you would think that they both had a good laugh, or they didn't, but it doesn't matter to the reader.
Yeah.
So.
You gonna say something, Ray?
No, I just kind of thinking out loud, on that piece, you kind of, as a listener, you kind of know something's coming, or at least I did. And then listen to Anne's, immediately I knew this was clever, and I just kind of rode that clever train. You know, I just enjoyed the cleverness. I wasn't waiting for a big aha laugh. I enjoyed the humor, you know, throughout. It was like two different, totally different approaches to the humor.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah.
Anybody
I wrote
else?
one sentence. I don't know if it's funny.
One
Well,
sentence? Okay. You have one line.
We'll be the judge of that.
I don't know. It was so cold that the moisture in people's exhales immediately froze and fell to the ground like a million little ice cream sprinkles.
Very poetic.
I don't think
The-
that happened.
It's, no, it's the thing, it's, well, yeah.
Can you read it a little
Yeah.
bit louder, Renee, for the folks in the back?
It was so cold that the moisture in people's exhales immediately froze and fell to the ground like a million little ice cream sprinkles.
It's a, yeah, very.
It happens.
Yeah, so as I said, it's poetic more than humorous. So where would you think the change of expectations is
I
there?
thought it was hyperbole because I don't think that really happens. So it's
Well,
like
but you know,
Jack-
but
that they
hyperbole-
pitter-pat on the ground
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
okay.
Like,
Yeah, you know, and hyperbole can exist and not be humorous too. It could just
Right.
be, you know,
Right.
hyperbole. But the question though is, you've got this beautiful sentence, and could there be a context that you could put it in that doesn't, that, you know, is incongruous or something that, you know, or someone wasn't expecting that, and that could add, you know, humor to it.
Right. Yeah. So, for example, if you followed that sentence was, you know, I looked down at the sprinkles, or I then took a next step and fell on my ass, slipping on the ice cream cone, you know, that was on the ground
or
already.
little ants on the ground are pelted by them.
Yeah.
You know, close, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, some sort of.
Something weird.
Yep.
I was thinking also that, like, I think I like old people jokes where
Yeah.
it's like the man getting, like that someone does something really slow, like a man getting out of, an old man getting out of a
Yeah.
bathtub, or like the people opening the candies in the theater.
Yeah, yeah.
And things
Yeah.
like, or maybe there's vision jokes, because like the way they see it is so bad that
Right.
it, like you make a million jokes about that.
Yeah.
You know.
Although you do, again, it goes back to audience. I have this joke that I think is so funny that I love. It's one of my favorite ones that I've ever heard. And this summer, we were at a table surrounded with a bunch of children, and I told the joke, and all the kids just stared. They just looked at me, you know, because they didn't get it, because they were just too young, because it was about memory. So it's, you know, an older woman and man are sitting on the porch, and, you know, the husband says to the wife, "I really feel like an ice cream sundae." And the wife says, "I want an ice cream sundae too." It's like, "I'm going to go down to the drugstore and get it." So the man starts leaving, and the wife says, "Don't forget the peanuts. You always forget my peanuts." And he goes, "I won't forget the peanuts." Comes back with the bag. She pulls out a ham and cheese sandwich. She opens it up and says, "I knew you were going to forget. I always tell you not to forget the mustard."
Wow, that was really took a few turns there, didn't it? Oh, that's awesome.
I think it's hysterical,
Yeah.
you know, because, you know, for those of us as we're getting older, you know, memories and things like that, but, you know, the kids just stared at it. They're
That's
like,
just great.
"Why was that funny?"
Yep.
And then, of course, I'm laughing because of the looks on their faces, because they, you know, completely didn't get it. And so sometimes it's your audience, you know, too, that sometimes it's not necessarily that what you wrote isn't funny. It's just the audience, you know, doesn't have enough information at their fingertips to be able to get the humor in
Right.
it.
The
so.
joke that bombed for my Japanese guests, we had visitors from a company we were working with, was a Maine joke. So there's a guy who lives on the border of, right on the border of Maine and New Hampshire, and the Maine surveyors are resurveying the border, and they realized that this guy who thought he lived in Maine, voted in Maine, sent his kids to school in Maine, everything, was actually a New Hampshire resident. He was actually on the other side of the line. So they drew straws to see who was going to tell this crotchety old guy, you know, what the scoop was, and the loser goes up and says, "You know, I hate to tell you, sir, but you're actually a New Hampshire resident. You actually live in New Hampshire." And the old man says, "Well, I was getting tired of them Maine winters anyway." Total silence.
Classic Japanese stuff. So we are out of time, but are there any questions? I mean, was this what folks expected? Was this helpful for you? Does it give you something that you can, take and use? Because as I said, this is a general workshop, so, we do have the intensive next week that, if any folks, want some more one-on-one time with your own personal pieces, you can sign up for those on our website. But anything that you were expecting that you didn't get? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And as I said, if you go to our website, we have, workshops that are coming up that might be useful to you as well. And definitely consider the open mic. It's always fun, to come and share people's works. And feel free to grab a snack for the road.
Yeah,
so.
I would like to plug my books, by the way. If anybody
Yes.
wants a signed copy, I can sell them for $10 instead of the usual 15. And there's also cards and bookmarks if you want to grab them on Amazon. They're cheap on Amazon on an e-reader. Much cheaper, $5 instead, or $3, I guess now, instead of 10.
You're underselling
but you don't
yourself,
get, but you
though.
don't get to. I think it's the more people that read it, I don't care how
Yeah.
it works. I just like to share my humor and make people laugh. And so let me know if you want to buy one here or take a card and grab it on Amazon.
Well, thanks for coming. We appreciate it.